Welcome to New York Nonprofit Media. My name is Jeff Stein, and I'm here with President of the Institute for Children, Poverty, and Homelessness, Ralph Nunez, who's here with a brand new report released yesterday called Why New York City's Homeless Family Policies Keep Failing. Obviously a very hot topic right now. Major shakeup in city government, the second in the past 6 months with Gilbert Taylor stepping down as commissioner of DHS. So this is a really wonderful time for you to come in and share your data and your expertise on this issue. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So obviously some very startling statistics, 247% rise in families with children in homeless shelters since 1990, 282% rise in the number of children in shelters. The problem's not getting any better. Maybe if you can start by explaining the methodology, what data points you looked at, and where you think the problem is headed.
Yeah, well, the data is basically city data that we've drawn upon. And we just took a look at it over time, just time variable. And when you look at it, you start to realize that it's a really public policy issue here. We've been in the wrong policy curve for the longest time. In fact, we're probably 180 degrees out. The issue is not just about housing. City policy is based basically on provision of more housing, prevention of people coming in, spend money to keep them where they are, and then you've got those that kick off, and the third is to create vouchers to move people out, temporary time-limited vouchers. When you look at those three basic policies that have been the policies for the past 30 years, you realize that they each fail at some particular point. And that is, prevention prevents people for a while, but eventually some portion of that segment of population comes into the shelters, your numbers go up. When you offer vouchers, we see that you stimulate. Every time vouchers are given out, more people come into the system to get in line to get a voucher. And the third aspect of that is if it's a temporary rental subsidy, what happens when the money runs out? People are supposed to become independent and they don't. And that's been the trend that all the data has shown for 30 years. Basically, policy's been based on the provision of housing with these supports. The real issue is not at the back door, how you move people out of shelter, it's at the front door. Why did they come to shelter? And what we find with that is that it's not an issue of I need housing, it's an issue of can you maintain your housing? So it's an issue of housing stability, not housing need.
So a big initiative this year, tenfold increase in what HRA is spending for legal services, eviction, prevention. Do you think that that will contribute to stemming that
Well, I have to tell you, having been around this issue for 30 years, from the government side and the nonprofit world, we've seen that before. We had that back in the late 80s. Yes, it keeps certain people from being evicted, but the question is for how long? Will they be back into this curve? And that's what happens. Again, prevention delays eventual homelessness for many families. Not all families, but for many. But you have to look at these policies all together. All these three aspects of prevention, of the provision of housing. There will never be enough affordable low-income housing brought online to deal with this in a particular timeline. You know, the last time that housing, low-income housing, was equal to the number of low-income renters was 1970. There's a 6 million deficit on that now across the country. New York City's not going to solve that. And then the issue is, we talk about affordable housing, affordable for who? So you really have a whole different scenario going on here. It's not just someone comes in and says, I can't stay in my home. There are some families like that, who they had a crisis, they have a work history, you can move them out. Those are truly homeless families. But there are families that come, young women who are 25 or below, who come with incomplete education, no work experience, they need parenting skills. If you were to put them in an apartment tomorrow, they'd be homeless when the voucher time ran out. And that's what happened with Bloomberg and the Advantage program. They gave vouchers, they moved so many people, and the numbers went down, the census went down, the length of stay in shelter went down, and when the vouchers ran out, 60% have returned to date. Now that is a big expense in the wrong direction. If we think about what we're doing, I think the biggest crime in homeless policy is that we have 30 years of experience. There are lessons learned and lessons clearly forgotten here. To find ourselves today back in the welfare hotels in a worse situation than we were in 1984, 5, and 6 is almost a crime. It is a misstep, and there needs to be a recognition, and this is a good thing. People think, well, it's in crisis now and the mayor's ordering this review and we're going to look at it. Well, actually, that's a gift. It's about time to take a hard look at this review, as long as we look over our shoulder and not just down at our feet. What's happening in back of us, and now where are we going forward? If we're just looking down and we're just going to make some changes in the agency, we're going to be spending more money on this issue, and we're going to be looking at more families, and the biggest thing is we're going to be looking at families that return over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So Commissioner Banks has said that this review period will mostly be internal, from what I can gather. Maybe the two agencies will combine, sort of unclear, but what would your suggestions be? What should Commissioner Banks, de Blasio really be looking at during this 90-day period?
Two things. Number one, if you're looking at the agency, then you have to ask the question. The mayor said, well, this agency's 20, 22 years old, it's time to look at it. Well, the Department of Homeless Services was born out of the Human Resource Administration. So it's like a child that was spun off, so now it's a young adult. If it's not working, bring it home. Bring it back into the agency that actually funds it. The funding comes through Human Resource Administration. Maybe it was a mistake breaking it off. The missions are lost there, and you're going back and forth across the street and you can't accomplish what you really want to do. The second thing is, what is the answer? If I tell you that the answer is at the front door, why are you here? Then you have to look. If you've done this for a long time, you can classify homeless families into three groups. That group, number one, are the families who have had tenancy, who have had jobs, they know what to do. They're the working poor who ended up here because they lost their job for a while. The second group are the young mothers I spoke of, 25 or below, who really need school, job training, jobs before they come out. And the third are really chronic, severe poverty. They are young mothers or older mothers who have domestic violence. They have child abuse and neglect issues. They have mental health issues. That's going to be a longer job. If you see the classification of homeless families into those three categories, then shelter and the idea that one size fits all, that everybody's in the shelter and you're all going to get an equal shot at housing, is wrong. Triage the shelter system that exists now to fit the needs of those three families. Instead, we've tried to make families fit a shelter system when we need to make a shelter system fit the needs of families. Triage it. Short-term stay shelters where those people have had jobs, right out. You'll take pressure off the system. Second one, what's wrong? You know, everyone looks at tomorrow. Oh, we need the housing. But today you have 90,000 kids in school, in public school, who are homeless, whether they're doubled up or whether they're living in the shelter system. You need to address while people are here. And the same thing with young mothers. What an opportunity to take a mother who didn't complete school, didn't get a GED, who's never worked, and train them within these facilities. They're sitting here now for over a year. The length of stay is 450-something days. And then the chronic part of the population, the third group, you'll have specialized facilities to deal with those problems. If you do that, four things will happen. Number one, you'll reduce the demand for shelter. Number two, you'll reduce the length of stay in shelter. Number three, you'll reduce recidivism, the return to shelter. And number four, you'll bring down the cost. It seems to me that is really a smart move, and that it's pretty simple. There's nothing here that's not anything more than common sense. This is not rocket science.
So before the interview, we were talking about the hope count and controversy about how accurate it is. Do you think that the city really needs to revisit the way that homeless New Yorkers are counted and data is collected?
Absolutely. It's ridiculous to go out in the middle of the winter in January and do a count. Look, the homeless street population is visible. When you come out in the newspaper and you say, well, there are only 3,000. Well, today I stepped over about 500. Tell me what's going on. It's so visible, hasn't been visible like this since the 1980s. People should be questioning this count. It's a joke. It's a joke. Let's face it. Let's get a real count. If we have a real count, maybe we can get a real solution. And the same thing can happen in the single population. Triage that population by their needs. A third are deinstitutionalized with mental health histories. They should be in specialized facilities where we can get them on meds and everything, not let them roam the street. Another 20% actually have some problems with outstanding warrants here and there, and they're in the shelter system. Let's take a look at that and what the issues are. And then you have what's left over are people who've been chronic homeless individuals who lost their jobs, lost their families. You see an article in the paper every now and then where a sister identifies her brother in a photograph and says, oh my God, where is he? You can do the same thing on the single side that you do on the family side and get your arms around this issue. Right now, nobody has their arms around it. It's kind of out of control. It's percolating up. But again, I think that the change that's happening in City Hall is such a unique opportunity. And to have Banks there is also an opportunity. He's been on the other side of the fence for a long time. There won't be agreements on everything. He has a certain ideology that he's trying to move forward on the housing side. But again, if everyone thinks the answer to homelessness, especially for families, is housing, they are misguided. It is housing stability, preparing families so that when we do move them out, When a voucher does expire, they're able to work because we train them, we got them education, and we've got them in more of an education curve, and then you can move them out and keep them out. If we don't do that, these numbers are just going to go up, up, up. And when people say to me, you're wrong, 30 years of analysis shows I may not be right, but certainly what we've done isn't.
Do you think that there has been, do you think that there have been elements missing from the public discussion about homelessness here in the city? Obviously, the tabloid press has taken it up. Do you think that it's representative of what the real problem is, who the homeless New Yorkers are, and what do you think should change?
I think it's totally misrepresented. The fastest growing group of homeless in this city are children. They're families with young children, young mothers. And we always think about what we see, the individual on the street that everyone complains about. The hidden homeless are our biggest risk factor. 25,000 kids in shelters, another 60-something thousand doubled and tripled up labeled homeless by the Board of Ed, right? And then their parents are extremely young. You have a young mother, 21, 2, 3, 4. What an opportunity to take a family rather than lose them down the road and try to deal with a 35, 40-year-old mother and older adolescents. What an opportunity to really deal with poverty. People always say there's no difference between these families and families that are housed. Really? Then why are they here? Because I know lots of families that are housed that are poor that aren't homeless. And no one knows that this is a children's issue. No one knows that your typical homeless person in this city is about a 12 or 13-year-old kid. And you know what the risk factor is there? If we don't deal with the youth aspect of homelessness, we will deal with them as adults, with children under their arms in the shelters. We will deal with them in the juvenile justice and eventually the criminal justice system. We will deal with teen pregnancy, eventually young mothers who now have 1 or 2 children under their arms and now they're homeless, and we will deal with it in the foster care system. It seems to me it makes a lot of sense to take a step back and take a good, hard look at who are these people? Who are these families? Tell me what the real problem is. We do surveys and then we ask a family. Every time I look at it, you would think the first thing is, I want housing. You know what the first thing is? I want to complete my education. I want a job that pays me enough to maintain my housing. So I think that tells volumes. It tells volumes.
Maybe as a final question, I know that ICPH has a conference coming up in January dealing with all of these issues. Maybe if you can tell our viewers a little bit about what's going to be going on there.
Sure. It's January 13th to the 15th. It's here in New York. You should visit our website, ICPHUSA.org. All the information is there, but it really deals, we have people from all over the country coming in. It deals with all the aspects around homelessness, family homelessness in particular, children, their education, healthcare, and the name of the conference is actually Beyond Shelter. We're looking beyond housing. We're looking beyond that. We're looking at the families. And I think that it's really worthwhile, if you're interested in this issue, to visit the website and maybe come to the conference.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming by this morning.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.